The dust from a passing stagecoach had barely settled when Harriet Collins first laid eyes on the dilapidated cabin that would become her temporary home. Her entire life reduced to the single carpetbag clutched in her trembling hand. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving Kansas prairie stretched before her like an ocean of golden grass, beautiful yet terrifying in its vastness. At 22, she had never imagined she would find herself alone in such a place, with nothing but painful memories and desperate hopes to sustain her. The cabin had belonged to her late uncle, a man she had met only twice in her life. His unexpected bequest had arrived just as Harriet's circumstances in Boston had become unbearable, her family's fortune lost, her reputation tarnished by a broken engagement, and her parents' recent deaths from influenza, leaving her with mounting debts and no prospects. As she pushed open the creaking door, Harriet fought back tears. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, dust covered every surface, and the sparse furniture looked ready to collapse. This was to be her salvation, this lonely outpost miles from the nearest town. She sank onto a rickety chair, exhaustion overwhelming her as the reality of her situation settled in her bones. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, though her voice sounded hollow in the empty room. "I must do this." Morning came too quickly. Harriet had spent an uncomfortable night on a thin mattress, her dreams haunted by the life she had left behind. She rose with the sun, determined to make her new dwelling habitable. After a meager breakfast of stale bread, the last of her provisions from the journey, she set about cleaning the cabin. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Harriet's fine cotton dress, wholly unsuitable for manual labor, clung to her perspiring skin. Her hands, once soft and pampered, were now raw from scrubbing. Worst of all, she had discovered that the well behind the cabin had run dry, water. She needed water. According to the stagecoach driver's directions, the nearest neighbor lived about 2 miles east. With no other choice, Harriet gathered her empty canteen and set off across the prairie. The tall grass whipped against her skirts as she walked, and the relentless sun beat down upon her uncovered head. She had gone perhaps a mile when her foot caught in a hidden hole, sending her tumbling to the ground with a cry of pain. Harriet tried to stand, but her ankle gave way beneath her. Tears of frustration sprang to her eyes as she slumped back onto the hard earth. What a fool she had been to believe she could survive here. She would die of thirst before she ever reached help. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw a rider approaching a tall figure on a chestnut horse. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by trepidation. She was alone, vulnerable, and entirely at the mercy of whoever this stranger might be. The rider drew closer, and Harriet could see that it was a man dressed in well-worn cowboy attire. He reined his horse to a stop a few paces from her and dismounted in one fluid motion. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. "Madam," his voice was deep but gentle. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Harriet managed, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I've twisted it, I think." He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "May I?" At her nod, he carefully examined her ankle, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so weathered. "Not broken, but a bad sprain. You shouldn't be walking on this." He looked up then, and Harriet found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a face tanned by the sun and marked by the elements. "Preston Dawson," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I ranch about 3 miles west of here. Harriet Collins. I've just arrived to take possession of my uncle's property, the old Whitaker place." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Jim Whitaker was your uncle? I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Collins. He was a good man." "Thank you," she replied softly, "though I hardly knew him." Preston looked around, taking in her solitary situation. "Were you heading somewhere in particular?" "I need water. The well at the cabin is dry." His expression grew concerned. "That's not good. Old Jim must have been having trouble before he passed." He stood and offered his hand. Let me help you onto my horse. I'll take you back to your place, then see about getting that well working again." Harriet hesitated. In Boston, accepting such help from a strange man would be scandalous, but this wasn't Boston and she had little choice. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, but I couldn't impose out here. Neighbors help neighbors, Miss Collins. It's how we survive." His smile was warm and genuine. "And please call me Preston." With his assistance, Harriet was soon seated atop his horse, Preston walking alongside with the reins in hand. As they made their way back to the cabin, he asked about her journey from Boston, listening attentively to her carefully edited tale. She omitted the financial ruin, the broken engagement, the whispers that had followed her through Boston society. Some wounds were too fresh to expose to a stranger, no matter how kind. At the cabin, Preston helped her inside, then set about examining the well. He returned an hour later, his shirt damp with sweat but a satisfied expression on his face. "The well had collapsed in on itself a bit, but I've cleared it out. There's water now, though not a lot. It should see you through until we can dig it deeper." Relief washed over Harriet. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks." He gestured to her ankle. "You should stay off that foot for a day or two. Do you have enough provisions?" Harriet's silence answered for her. Preston nodded as if having expected this. "I'll bring some supplies tomorrow. It's no trouble," he added, seeing her about to protest. "Jim Whittaker helped me when I first arrived here with nothing but the clothes on my back. I'd be honored to extend the same kindness to his niece." After Preston departed, Harriet hobbled to the door to watch him ride away, his straight-backed figure gradually disappearing into the vastness of the prairie. For the first time since arriving, she felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps she wasn't entirely alone after all. True to his word, Preston returned the next day with a wagon loaded with supplies, food, water barrels, tools, and even some seedlings for a garden. He seemed to anticipate everything she might need before she could even think to ask for it. "The general store in Willow Creek has your name now," he explained as he unloaded sacks of flour and beans. "You can get credit there until you're on your feet." "But how will I pay it back?" Harriet asked, the specter of debt all too familiar. Preston gestured to the land around them. "Your uncle left you 40 acres. Good land, too. You could grow wheat, raise some chickens. It won't make you rich, but you could make a decent living." "I know nothing about farming," Harriet admitted, feeling helpless. "In Boston, she stopped herself, unwilling to reveal the pampered existence she had once led. Preston seemed to understand anyway. "Everyone starts somewhere. I knew nothing about ranching when I came west 5 years ago. I was a bookkeeper in Philadelphia." His smile was self-deprecating. "Had my nose so deep in ledgers, I nearly forgot what daylight looked like." Over the next few weeks, as summer heated up across the prairie, Preston became a regular visitor to Harriet's cabin. He taught her to plant the garden, to repair simple things around the property, and brought her books on farming and animal husbandry from his own modest library. Sometimes he stayed for supper, eating the simple meals she prepared with appreciation that made her blush with pleasure. Harriet found herself looking forward to his visits, counting the hours until she might see his tall figure riding toward her cabin. There was a quiet strength about Preston that made her feel safe, and a gentleness that surprised her. He never asked why she had left Boston, seeming to understand that some stories needed time before they could be told. One evening in late July, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson, Preston finally shared his own story. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Philadelphia," he said quietly. "My wife died in childbirth, along with our son. Afterward, I couldn't bear to remain in the city where every street corner held a memory of her." Harriet's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Preston." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "For a long time, I thought I'd never feel anything again except grief, but then, slowly, the land started to heal me. There's something about this place, the openness, the vastness of it, makes a man's troubles seem smaller somehow." His gaze shifted to her face, and something in his expression made Harriet's breath catch. "What about you, Harriet? What brought you to a place so far from everything you knew?" The moment had come. Harriet took a deep breath, deciding that if Preston had trusted her with his pain, she could trust him with hers. "My father was a successful merchant in Boston, but he made some poor investments. When he and my mother died of influenza last winter, I discovered we were deeply in debt." The words came more easily than she had expected. "I was engaged to be married to a man from a prominent family, but when he learned of our financial situation, her voice faltered. He broke the engagement," Preston finished for her, his tone hardening slightly. "Yes. And made sure everyone in our social circle knew why." Harriet blinked back tears. "I sold everything to pay the debts, but it wasn't enough. When I received the letter about Uncle Jim's bequest, it seemed like providence." Preston was silent for a moment. That man in Boston, he was a fool. Harriet looked up, startled by the conviction in his voice. "Any man who would abandon you over something as meaningless as money doesn't deserve you," Preston continued, his blue eyes intense. "You're stronger than he could ever understand." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. In that moment, as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, Harriet realized she was falling in love with Preston Dawson. The realization terrified her. August brought scorching heat and drought. The creek that ran through both their properties slowed to a trickle, and the garden Harriet had so carefully tended began to wither despite her best efforts. One afternoon, as she struggled to carry water from the well to save her dying plants, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. By the time they reached her cabin, Harriet had recognized Preston among them. The other men were strangers, rough-looking cowboys whose appraising glances made her uncomfortably aware of her solitary vulnerability. "Miss Collins," the leader of the group called out, removing his hat. "Name's Frank Carlson. I own the Double C Ranch north of here." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to make you an offer for this property." Harriet straightened her spine. "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Carlson." The man's smile tightened. "With respect, madam, this drought's going to get worse before it gets better. A woman alone can't hope to make it out here." "I believe Miss Collins has made her position clear," Preston interjected, moving his horse forward. "She's not selling." Carlson's gaze shifted to Preston, his expression cooling. "This isn't your concern, Dawson. Miss Collins is my neighbor. That makes it my concern." The tension between the two men was palpable. Harriet's heart raced as she saw Carlson's hand drift toward the gun at his hip. "Now, Frank," one of the other cowboys said, breaking the silence. "We came to talk business, not start trouble." After a long moment, Carlson nodded curtly. "Think about my offer, Miss Collins. $500 for the land, more than fair, considering." With that, he replaced his hat and signaled to his men. They rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. When they were gone, Preston dismounted and approached Harriet. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Why does he want my land so badly?" "Water rights," Preston explained grimly. "Your property controls access to the upper part of the creek. In a drought like this, that's worth killing for to some men." "Will he come back?" "Probably." Preston's expression was troubled. Carlson's not known for taking no for an answer. "Maybe you should consider his offer, Harriet. Not for the reason he gave you're more capable than most men I know, but for your safety." "This land is all I have," Harriet replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't be bullied into giving it up." Preston looked at her for a long moment, admiration and concern warring in his eyes. "Then we'll need to be prepared. I'll stay here tonight if that's all right with you. I don't trust Carlson not to try something." That night, as Preston kept watch from her porch, Harriet lay awake in her small bedroom, thinking about how quickly her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had arrived with nothing but despair and determination. Now she had a home she was willing to fight for, and a man who was willing to stand beside her in that fight. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Dawn was breaking when Harriet heard the shots. She rushed from the cabin to find Preston exchanging gunfire with two men who had taken cover behind her woodpile. As she watched in horror, one of the attackers fell, but the other got off a shot that caught Preston in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Without thinking, Harriet grabbed the shotgun Preston had insisted on teaching her to use. She fired a warning shot into the air, then aimed directly at the remaining attacker. "The next one won't miss," she called out, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. The man hesitated, then bolted for his horse and galloped away, leaving his wounded companion behind. Harriet rushed to Preston's side. Blood soaked his shirt, but he was conscious, his blue eyes finding hers with a pained smile. "That was some shooting, Miss Collins." "Be quiet and let me help you," she replied, fighting back tears as she helped him to his feet and into the cabin. The wound was serious but not life-threatening. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, missing any vital areas. Harriet cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, using skills she had learned during the war when she had volunteered at a military hospital, another piece of her past she had never shared with him. As she worked, Preston watched her face. "You're full of surprises, Harriet Collins." "As are you, Preston Dawson. I never expected you to get yourself shot defending my worthless piece of land." His hand caught hers, stopping her movements. "Nothing you value is worthless, Harriet." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment Harriet thought he might kiss her. Then he winced in pain, breaking the spell. "You need rest," she said briskly, covering her emotion with practicality. "You can take my bed, I'll keep watch." Preston shook his head. "Send for the sheriff in Willow Creek. Carlson's gone too far this time." By the time Sheriff Miller arrived the following day, Preston's fever had spiked alarmingly. The local doctor, summoned along with the sheriff, diagnosed infection and prescribed bed rest and careful monitoring. "He shouldn't be moved," the doctor told Harriet. "Not until the fever breaks." Sheriff Miller, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, took statements from both Harriet and the wounded attacker, who had survived and confirmed that Carlson had hired them to persuade Harriet to sell. "I'll be arresting Frank Carlson," the sheriff assured her. "But his boys are still out there and they're loyal. I'd recommend you stay with friends in town until this blows over." "I can't leave," Harriet replied, glancing toward the bedroom where Preston lay. "He was shot defending my property. I won't abandon either of them." The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll send a deputy to keep an eye on things for a few days, and Miss Collins, get yourself more ammunition for that shotgun." For 3 days and nights, Harriet barely left Preston's side, bathing his fevered brow, changing his bandages, and speaking softly to him during his delirious moments. Sometimes he called her by another name, Sarah. His dead wife, and the pain in his voice as he begged her not to leave him again broke Harriet's heart. On the 4th night, his fever finally broke. Harriet, exhausted from her vigil, had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed. She woke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he murmured. "Where else would I be?" she replied, blinking back tears of relief. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Thank you for saving my life." "You saved mine first," Harriet whispered. "Not just from Carlson's men, but from despair. When I arrived here, I thought I had nothing left." "You had everything that matters," Preston said softly. "Courage, determination, a heart that refuses to be broken no matter what life throws at it." Harriet's throat tightened with emotion. "I was so afraid you would die. It would take more than a bullet to keep me from coming back to you." The words hung between them, full of promise and possibility. As Preston recovered over the next 2 weeks, their relationship deepened. They spoke of their pasts more openly, Preston of his brief, happy marriage and his grief afterward, Harriet of her sheltered upbringing and the painful lessons of her family's downfall. Each revelation brought them closer, building a foundation of trust that neither had expected to find again. News came that Frank Carlson had been convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. His ranch was being sold off to pay his debts, and the threat he had posed was finally over. The drought, too, began to ease with the arrival of September rains that replenished the creek and brought new life to Harriet's struggling garden. On a clear autumn evening, as they walked along the creek that divided their properties, Preston stopped beneath a towering cottonwood tree. "I've been thinking," he said, suddenly serious. "Your uncle's land and mine, they complement each other. Together they could make a fine operation. Cattle on my side, crops on yours." Harriet's heart quickened. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Dawson?" "No." He took her hands in his. "I'm proposing something far more important than business. Harriet, these past months have shown me that life can begin again, even after you think all hope is lost. I never expected to find someone who could make me feel this way again, someone I could admire, respect, and love with my whole heart." Tears filled Harriet's eyes as Preston continued. "I know it hasn't been that long, and maybe I'm rushing things, but out here, we learn quickly what matters. And you, Harriet Collins, matter more to me than anything." "Preston, Harriet hesitated, old fears rising to the surface. "When I left Boston, I had nothing, no money, no prospects, just this land." "You're wrong," Preston said gently, lifting a hand to cup her cheek. "You had everything that makes you the woman I love: your strength, your kindness, your determination. Those things are worth more than all the money in Boston." She thought of the man who had abandoned her at the first sign of financial difficulty, and how different Preston was: a man who valued character over circumstance, who saw her worth when she had doubted it herself. "I love you, Preston," Harriet whispered. "I think I have since that first day when you found me stranded in the prairie and treated me with such kindness." His smile lit up his face. "Then will you marry me, Harriet Collins? Will you join your life and your land with mine and build something together that's greater than either of us could create alone?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married in October in the small church in Willow Creek. The entire community turned out for the ceremony: ranchers and farmers who had become friends, the sheriff and his deputies, even Preston's ranch hands, scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Harriet wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. As they exchanged vows, Harriet thought of how far she had come from that desperate young woman who had arrived with nothing but a carpetbag and fading hopes. She had found not just survival on this frontier, but a kind of prosperity she had never known in Boston: the richness of genuine connection, hard-earned respect, and love that had been tested and proven in adversity. That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their shared home, Preston having insisted they live in her cabin rather than his larger but more Spartan ranch house, they looked out over their combined lands, silver in the moonlight. "Are you happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Preston asked, his arms encircling her from behind. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Harriet replied truthfully. "When I arrived here, I thought I had lost everything that mattered." Preston turned her gently to face him. "She said, 'I have nothing,'" he quoted with a tender smile. The cowboy answered, "You're everything to me." As their lips met in a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership and love, Harriet knew that some journeys begin only when we think we've reached the end of the road. Her journey west had started in desperation, but had led her to a destination she could never have imagined: a place where having nothing had revealed everything that truly mattered. 5 years later, Harriet stood on the same porch, watching Preston return from the fields with their 4-year-old son perched proudly atop his horse. Their daughter, just 2, squirmed in Harriet's arms, eager to join her father and brother. The Dawson Ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The combination of Preston's cattle operation and Harriet's agricultural knowledge, expanded through determined study and practical experience, had created one of the most successful enterprises in the county. They had built a new, larger home the previous year, but kept the original cabin as a reminder of their beginnings. As Preston lifted their son down from the horse and approached with that same warm smile that still made her heart skip, Harriet reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken. The society woman from Boston was now a capable ranch wife who could ride as well as any man, shoot straight, birth a calf, and still serve a dinner that would make her mother proud. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Preston asked as he reached her, leaning in for a kiss. "I was thinking about how sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you truly need," Harriet replied, leaning into his embrace as their children played at their feet. In the golden light of the Kansas sunset, surrounded by the family and the land she loved, Harriet Dawson knew that she had found the truest wealth of all, not in the things she possessed, but in the love she had given and received along the way.